Welcome to the fall.
Welcome, everyone. It's good to be back. And welcome to Coffee with Foul Play, Troll Tunnel Vision, and we're on episode number 2. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Silkman, and I'm the host of today's podcast. And joining us on today's podcast, we have our regular researchers, Big Jeff. We have Kelly, Christy, and monitoring Sammy and Zoe. So they'll be monitoring the YouTube channel. And guys, we welcome all sorts of questions. So please put your questions and we'll try and answer them during the podcast. And I'd like to welcome our guest researcher for today, K9 Kim. And before we start the podcast proper, the Foul Play team, would like to thank everyone. We have reached 728 subscribers, and that's fabulous. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe to our channel. We really do appreciate it very much, and it's awesome that you support us. We've only really been in existence for a few months, and it's great to be part of the research community. Collectively, our videos on the Foul Play channel have had over 145,000 views. That's really awesome. We'll make a start on the actual podcast, but before we do, I'd like to invite K9 Kim, who's our special guest. K9, Kim, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what interested you in the Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey cases? No.
I don't know. About 4 years.
Yeah.
I watched Making a Murderer, and it really interested me because I felt like Stephen and Brendan were innocent, and that's where it all started. I started digging into it.
Yeah.
Other than that, I'm an armchair sleuth. That's all.
I think we all are, Kane. Thank you so much for that. Much appreciated. And welcome to the podcast. Before we actually start the podcast, I'd like to thank and give a big shout out to Big Jeff and the team for the fantastic podcast that they did yesterday regarding the Ricky Hodstetler case. And Big Jeff and the team were speaking with Debbie. Big Jeff, do you just have a couple of quick words that you would like to state about that podcast? I thought it was absolutely riveting.
So, thank you very much, Dr. Silva. I would just like to thank Debbie Hochstetler because that must have been a very difficult thing to do, to really open up in that very emotional way and talk about herself. And I really do hope and pray that she gets the answers that she's looking for, and to the extent that she can be helped out by this community.
Yeah.
If I could interject one more thing, Dr. Silva.
Of course.
Here in the Foul Play channel, where we have representatives from all over the world, and those of us outside Australia are well aware of the environmental disaster that's currently ongoing.
Yeah.
And we wish you all to be safe and healthy. And
Jeff, yeah, I mean, for us, for where we're impacted by the bushfires, as in directly, but it is very, very scary, very frightening. And we've had days here in Adelaide, South Australia, where you can smell the smoke, you can see the haze. And yesterday, if I could just recollect this little story, when we had our air conditioner on because it was extremely hot. The air conditioner was actually bringing in the smoke from outside. I cleaned my air conditioning vent yesterday and it was black, full of ash. And it was just a reminder, a scary reminder of the, true devastation that's happened. And my son's friend who lives in the hills here, in all the properties around his house burnt down. The fire stopped at the perimeter of his fence on all four sides. And, that's really, really frightening. And it really just brings home how devastating the fires are, not only to human life. Apparently, there's close to 1 billion animals that have been lost. And it's going to take Australia between 50 to 100 years to recover for sure. But thank you, Big Jeff, and thank you everyone for all your good wishes. As you know, Australians have been through this many, many times. Like there's big fires in America as well, and especially in California. And we know what it's all about. And the Australian spirit is very strong. And we help each other, and we will rebuild. Hopefully for a bigger and better place. And it's a big wake-up call for climate change. And the government has to realise that it's got to do things and put things in place to ensure that disasters like this don't reoccur. But hopefully the fires will burn out and we can start recovering and, getting back to what we. Well, look, thank you so much, guys. I do appreciate that. And with we can start our podcast proper. And last time we left on slide 173. And as you know, the verdicts were in. Stephen Avery was found guilty. And then, of course, they interviewed the successful prosecuting team for the state. Then they interviewed, of course, the defense team that lost the case. And as you can see, there was a lot of devastation, as one can imagine. And you can see on the bottom left-hand corner, the father, Alan, displaying how obviously upset and devastated he was, and still is, of course. And don't forget, we mustn't forget that his whole family has gone through this before with the Penny Bernstein case. So this is, if you can believe it, the second time his family had to endure a trial like this, and it really must be very, very devastating. And just finally, we had one of the jurors, Richard Mailer, who had to be excused because of some family emergency that took place. Now, it was very interesting in MAM 1 when they were talking to him. It was interesting to find out that the original verdicts were 7 not guilty, 3 guilty, and 2 undecided. And it's remarkable how there was such a massive turnaround when, of course, the jury found Stephen Avery guilty on the charges. So, yeah, it's incredible getting a perspective from a juror, the types of wheelings and dealings that must have gone on in the room. Panel, does anyone want to make any comments about that? I mean, we had the verdicts. We know he was found guilty. Does anyone want to make any quick comments on that? Big Jeff.
Well, just like everything in this case, even the circumstances under which that juror was dismissed are not clean.
No.
I'm not sure whether we talked about this last week.
Only briefly. Only briefly.
But I'm sure there are a lot of people who know a lot more than me, but it's not even clear that it really was an emergency after all. I guess his daughter was in a minor accident.
Yes.
and it was told to him that it was a major traffic accident and that, there was a real issue that he needed to leave. It turned out he really didn't leave at all. In
Yes.
terms of, and it's typical of this case.
Yeah. Yes.
that text you have on the top hand side of this, that has Coburn hoping that
Yes.
the faith is restored, and that's not obviously not the case. So
Yes.
his hope was not answered, I think.
No, and of course he's got the current lawsuit with Netflix as well. So this case is still very much alive. But you're right about the juror. But it was very interesting to see when he left whether that had an impact on the dynamics of the final verdicts that took place. Of course, we're never going to know. But yes, Colburn, as you can see here, he was trying to get back the confidence back in the Manitowoc police force and the county there. But it's remarkable if you go to the Stephen Avery org site, they actually document all the negative phone calls, letters, and emails that the MTSO received. And it's amazing the amount of negativity that the MTSO received. And Christy, if I can just ask you, Ken Kratz made similar comments in his book, right? He was surprised with all the negativity that came his way. Christy, do you have any comments about that?
Not really. It's kind of, I'm not sure. Where do you want me to go with this one?
Well, in terms of like the real purpose of Ken writing that book, what was why did he write such a book? Was he surprised by the negativity that he received?
He was surprised that so many people fell for what Netflix sold them. His book was because Netflix was so biased towards Stephen, he had to get his version out there. And then
Yes.
his additional 2 chapters are more of the I can't believe my book didn't do great. I can't believe you people still believe Netflix was kind
Yes.
of a that's just his that's why I don't know. It's Ken Kratz. What can I say?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and you're right. I'm rereading the book. I think Christy is as well.
I'm about to start.
God bless. I'm about a third of the way through, and what I'm doing is I'm taking down quotes, Ken Kratz's own quotes from his book, and we'll be doing a podcast coming up at some stage, looking at the analysis of that book, and it's very, very interesting. The way he has an us versus them approach. It's obvious that the team from the Netflix crew spoke with Ken, but he didn't want to be interviewed and he only wanted to have a minor role. And now he's bitterly complaining, and we can see that Colburn is even suing Netflix for, misrepresentation of him on the stand. But of course, we do have the original transcripts. We can see how it went down. So, he's claiming all these things, which was not very good. All right, guys. So if we can actually start the podcast proper and go to slide 174. Now, as we know, Scott Tadych played a very important role in the trial. Right? He actually was a star witness for the state. And Scott provided 2 pieces of important information for the trial, in the trial. He, first of all, he had provided an alibi for Bobby Dassey. Now, remember, there was the conflict with what Bobby Dassey told in the trial compared to what Stephen Avery was stating in regards to seeing Teresa Hallbach and the Toyota RAV4. Now, Stephen Avery stated that after he had paid Teresa for the photo shoot, he actually saw Teresa Hallbach leave the Avery salvage yard. If you contrast that with what Bobby said, he saw Teresa walking towards Stephen Avery's trailer. He took a shower, apparently took a very quick shower. And when he went out, because he was going bow hunting, he didn't see Teresa Hallbach, but he saw her Toyota RAV4. So you've got this massive conflict in recollections at this point. One of them had to be wrong. And it's interesting that Scott Tadych was able to give an alibi for Bobby Dassey because they had encountered each other on the road. There's also another important piece of evidence or statement that Scott Tadych made during the trial. Scott Tadych, under questioning, stated that he had seen this really large fire behind Stephen's garage. Millbilly, do you want to make any comments about that large fire that Scott Tadych saw?
Well, he was first just brought in to verify there was a fire.
Yes.
And as each trial, pre-trial, and then the other hearing, and then his actual trial, his statement changes and the fire begins to grow and get bigger and bigger.
Yes.
What we hear on these jail calls on the 26th of December, when Scott Tadych is talking to Stephen Avery, he asks him about the fire. And he confirms that by the time he dropped Barb off, that the fire was pretty much done.
Yeah.
Now, if he's stating that, why is he saying that? Well, you gotta look at his statements. When he first says he dropped, well, first he says when he picked Barb up the first time, he says that Stephen, Barb, and Brennan were standing together outside. He picked her up and they left. Then his statement changes and says when he picked her up, she was inside the house and Stephen and Brendan were nowhere to be seen.
Yep.
Then he says when he dropped her off, he observed two people standing by the fire.
That's right. Yes. And he didn't know who that person was.
Exactly.
Yep. Yep. Which is very interesting. Yeah. And you're right, Millbilly. Thank you so much for that. It's really of a concern because the fire got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think he stated in court that the fire was as tall as the garage. So he got this massive fire. And of course, the state is stating that Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey had burned Teresa Hallbach in the fire. And experts have stated, oh, Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
I didn't mean to interrupt, but
no, not at all.
It's just that, as I've said before, a bonfire on Halloween is an invitation for people to come over and and if you think about all the people that had that opportunity but didn't take it, certainly Barb and Scott were there and they left. How easy would it to been for let's go say hi to Stephen and Brendan while they're having this fire. Any one of the other boys who were who came home later could have came over and talked to Uncle Stephen as he was tending this fire on Halloween. What kind of a risk is that to take? That's just and Fabian and Earl.
Yeah,
driving around, like they could have stopped by the fire as well. What would they have seen? It just doesn't. It just don't make no sense.
It doesn't make any sense. Thank you, Big Jeff. Christy, do you have a comment?
Yeah, he said exactly what I was going to say. I was going to say it don't make no sense.
Yeah. Now, obviously in Australia, we sort of celebrate Halloween, but we don't really like bonfires per se. Now, doing a bonfire on a salvage yard or a farm, is that no big deal? Is that just normal?
Very normal.
Christy. Yeah.
Very normal.
So why is it that the state is making a big deal that Stephen had a fire on Halloween? Is there a reason why? Big Jeff.
Burned bones.
Burnt bones. Correct. Yeah. Yes, he had to burn a body, of course. But in all jokes aside, even Brendan, in his statements, was stating that they went around with a golf cart collecting a few pieces of junk, and they brought it next to the fire pit, and they were going to burn them. I'm not sure whether they burned everything, but they used a couple of tires. Millbilly, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Stephen Avery meant to burn some brush as well?
Yes, he burnt the brush that Redant had cut down. He also
Right.
burned 4 tires and the
Yes.
coffee table. And in
Right.
these jail calls, you can hear Barb kind of bitching about that he burned that because she wanted to hang it up in the garage as a shelf.
Right. Okay.
And he
Okay.
tells her, Tom Yonda gave it to me, but I left it out by the cars and it rained and it got all weathered. So I just
Yes.
figured I'd burn it.
Yes. And again, thank you, Millbilly. And again, that really shows the importance of the phone calls. And we have, I think, well over 850 calls, I believe, on the Foul Play server channel. And it's really starting to fill in a lot of the missing gaps. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
Another thing that was filled in by the calls was the assertion that there was a seat burned, and that seat was actually was thought at one time perhaps to be the back seat to Barb's van.
That's right.
That was being sold, and not only was it not that seat, but that wasn't even burned on that day, according to Stephen in the jail calls.
Yes, and that's remarkable because I think I read a report somewhere that they initially thought that the boys had burnt the back seat of the RAV4. Has anyone ever heard that? So there was all these rumors going around that they actually were burning the back seat of the RAV4. Millbilly.
Yes, I believe I seen that in a Nancy Grace program too.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. So you've got all these rumors that start, and there's no basis in reality to them, but they're very, very harmful and very, very detrimental to Stephen and Brendan. So lighting a fire on Halloween is no big deal, and you can see if you look at the reports, Scott Tadych reports that the fire got bigger and bigger and bigger until Strang showed him a report where he initially stated that the fire was only about 3 feet tall. And then he goes, well, I suppose if that's what I said, that's what I said. And you're wondering. And it's pretty obvious why Scott Tadych would say that the fire was bigger and bigger. When one thinks about it, experts who've seen bodies burn know that to cremate a body, to the extent that the victim was cremated, and all that was left were tiny bone fragments, some smaller than your fingernail, quite small fragments. So the victim was thoroughly burnt, thoroughly cremated. You require a huge amount of fuel, a huge amount of direct heat. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to cremate the body to that extent. So therefore, the state wanted a witness to state that they saw a massive fire, right? And clearly, there wasn't a massive fire at all. We mustn't forget that, of course, Bear had his doghouse next to the burn pit. And can anyone tell us what huge object was near the burn pit as well? BB, would you like to tell us what that big object was?
The LP tank, which if they were building this huge, massive fire, could have easily have exploded it. The dog would have been barbecued or singed, for God's sake.
Yes.
There's just no way. It would have probably caught the garage on fire also and blown it up with whatever's in there.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. You want to talk about a mess? If he'd had some huge fire there, it would have been a mess.
Yeah, correct. But yet That's the way Ken Kratz played it.
Yeah.
That there was this massive, huge fire there.
And he also said there was puddles of blood in the RAV too.
In the RAV4, correct. So what you have here is you've got this embellishment. Things are much greater than what they actually were.
That's such a nice word for it. So I can think of a few other words for it. That's the nicest way you could put it.
Yes, an enhancement. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
Yeah, well, while we're on the subject of Scott Tadych, there's just so much of Scott to talk about. You know, we have the 2010 phone call between that's played on MAM or MAM 2. I can't remember which one.
Yeah.
Where Stephen is talking to Barb, and Barb is complaining about Zellner, you know, looking at the people in her family, and Stephen says, well, she's just going where the evidence is taking him. You know, he informs Barb that it might be your husband that she's looking at. And we know Zellner has claimed, although it's not in her current filing, to have an affidavit for someone who can put Scott Tadych on the property at noon.
Well, doesn't that change things? Doesn't that change things?
We haven't seen that affidavit yet. We don't know who that person is that is actually making that statement. I've always found those two statements very interesting when put together. And it's always very I think everyone on the panel finds it very fishy that Bobby Dassey, who is not the brightest bulb in the circuit, you know, when he was giving his story, he said, "Oh yeah, Scott will be able to tell you exactly what time we passed each other." Well, how does he know that?
Because he just happened to look at the clock to validate Bobby Dassey driving past him at a certain time. But thank you, Big Jeff. But you're right. Here's the issue: if Scott Tadych actually was there, now remember, Scott Tadych works at night, so he's relatively free during the day. Same with Bobby Dassey. Now, if you remember what Stephen stated, Stephen was going to go over to his sister's place, and he noticed that the blazer was gone. Now, Stephen didn't actually see who was in the blazer. We don't know who was in the blazer. Could it have been Scott? Could it have been Bobby? Or could it have been them that were in the blazer that just so happened to follow the Teresa's Toyota RAV4 out of the Avery salvage yard? BB, Jeff.
For all we know, it could have been Mike Oates.
Well, there we go. We just simply do not know. And that's why I keep on harping back. To me, that represents one of the most important elements in this case. The stories diverge 180 degrees. Either Stephen Avery is mistaken deliberately, Bobby Dassey is lying. You can't have both stories be true. And it's interesting that very early on, Stephen Avery mentions the fact that Bobby Dassey's blazer was gone. So it's not something he invented months down the track. He was saying this very, very early on. Millbilly, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the MTSO consider, or the investigators consider, Bobby Dassey as a suspect?
Millbilly has a call, so.
He's got a call. No problem. Big Jeff.
They did, according to the phone calls, and maybe Christy can help us out. Stephen is talking to, I believe, Barb, and Barb indicates that they did give Bobby quite a difficult interview. I believe it was on November 9th when they rounded most of them up. And that interview, which they denied even having in the first place, we have seen in the pictures that Henbury got released, the pictures of the tapes
of a tape
that are labeled. So they lied about taping them, and we've seen pictures, but of course, somebody recently was denied a FOIA, claiming that they're under seal pending perhaps another retrial.
Another retrial. Chrissy, do you have a thank you, Big Jeff.
It was actually call number 6. And
call number 6.
He's talking to Dolores. Yes, I eat, sleep, and breathe these phone calls. I know where they're at. I know exactly how to find what you're looking for. That's why they're now calling me the call girl. The call Jeff is referring to is call number 6. It happens on November 11th, and he's actually talking to Dolores. Dolores tells him how brutal they were in their interrogation of Bobby, that they really gave it to him hard.
Yep. Thank you, Christy. K9, do you have a comment?
Well, yeah, I kind of do, because it's really kind of confusing. So Scott Tadych was supposed to be in what, Green Bay at the hospital with his mom having back surgery.
Correct.
So how is it possible for him to come back at like 2:30, 2:45, whatever he said, but yet his vehicle be there at noon?
Christy, great question, K9. Christy, do you have a comment?
Well, that's part of the problem, Kim. Law enforcement didn't verify anybody else's story because it didn't matter to them. Stephen was guilty. Stephen did this. They had their man. So Scott's, to my knowledge, Scott being at the hospital with his mother was never confirmed nor denied in any way.
Right. Right. I agree with that, Christy. But in that phone call with Barb, Stephen states that they have surveillance. And she's like, what do you mean? They have surveillance in the hospital? Well, yeah, and in the parking lot and whatever. But you're right, Dr. Silkman and Christy both. They never did go back and double check with the hospital to see if he had actually shown up.
Yep, and thank you, K9. That's a very, very good point. You see, here's the problem, right? If you don't check the veracity of someone's story and you accept it as fact, then potentially you can be led down the wrong path investigatively. And I remember Strang questioned Scott what he was doing, and he was very, very sure with Strang when he said, I didn't take the day off. I was there visiting my mother who was having back surgery, right? So he was very, very annoyed at being questioned about what he was actually doing. But of course, as K9 and Christy alluded to, we don't know the veracity of that story. And I believe Stephen even hinted that Scott was violent towards his mother. So I'm not sure whether that was scuttlebutt or a rumor, but Scott in that phone call got very, very upset with Stephen and said some really nasty things towards him. But what is amazing is that, as you can see on slide 174, during the Avery verdict, Scott says, and I'll read it out, what happened yesterday is the best thing in the world. He, obviously referring to Stephen Avery, got what he got coming to him. Big Jeff, do you want to make a comment about that? Not bad for a brother-in-law, not bad for a future brother-in-law.
With friends like that, who needs Ken Kratz, right?
Yes.
So now that Millbilly has returned, I was curious, since you mentioned whether or not that was scuttlebutt, if he could make a comment regarding Scott Tadych's police record since his testifying in Stephen's case.
Well, there's multiple people in this case that don't have a record that should.
Yeah. And or that did at one point.
And I've also noticed now when I go back and look at certain people's names, stuff is starting to appear.
Yes. But Millbilly, do you think it's possible that backroom deals were done and police records were expunged?
Yeah, no question. But as to Scott Tadych, I believe him alibying Bobby Dassey was to remove a certain person from the situation completely.
Okay.
And this whole person in multiple different interviews, different years, different months, different times, different people state the same thing. It's comes out of Bobby's mouth, comes out of Brendan's mouth, that he hangs out with Mike O every single day.
Yes. Yes. Yes, he does.
In the '04 fire of Barb's Blazer, Bobby Dassey states that he got home from school and then he went to Mike O's to go goose hunting.
Yes.
Brendan Dassey's first interrogation, he states that Mike O and Bobby Dassey go goose hunting every single day.
Right.
Mike O claims
Where?
that the only time he was on the property between the 31st of October and the 14th of October or November
Yes.
was November 10th. And he claims that's when that statement about getting rid of a body.
That's correct.
Possible. Not the whole Avery compound, which they like to refer to, is locked down. The whole 147 is locked down. You can't even drive. And Stephen Avery's arrested on November 9th. So how is Mike Osmondson talking to Stephen Avery on November 10th at the Avery's property when it's a lockdown crime scene and Stephen Avery's in car?
Yeah. In fact, we actually covered this, Billy, in one of our earlier podcasts.
Yes.
And it was actually very embarrassing for the state. And I believe that the defense were going for a mistrial because you had all this hearsay and rumor and innuendo without and nothing matched. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
Well, yeah. Now that we have Billy on the stand here, it's always remarkable when we find who's related to who. Who's Mike Osmondson related to? That another name that we might know. Billy.
What do you mean?
Is he related to? Is he related to Remico?
I don't believe so.
Oh, okay.
Oh, jeepers.
There's so many connections for just a quick. I mean, Manitowoc's a small place.
Right.
I mean, it's like population. The city of Manitowoc's a population of like 30,000 people.
Right.
Compared to like Milwaukee and Madison. Milwaukee's got almost 700,000. Madison's got over 280.
Yeah.
Green Bay's got more people than Madison and Manitowoc.
Yeah.
And was there a discrepancy between the statement that Brendan made with regard to where Bobby and Mike went hunting every day when they went for quail? Didn't he say they did that in the quarry?
He did say that in his November 6th interview.
Yeah, and didn't Bobby say that he never went hunting in the quarry?
Correct.
So
but you got to think about you own a four-wheel. Where would you ride it?
Yeah, a quarry.
Adjacent to the property.
And you obviously know the neighbors of the property because Josh Rodon talks stopping over to see the deer that Bobby.
Yeah.
Now the question is, what day did that happen? Because there's conflicting statements from multiple people on when events take place.
Correct. Especially about the
Stephen Avery statement never changes. In fact, he begins to remember more. But after all these jail calls, he don't slip up once. He always maintains the same.
Yes.
And that's why the cops used it to go after his alibi. And like Christy stated, where in the investigation case did they go after the alibi lab?
Yeah. And Millbilly, if I could just add, and Christy, I'm sure will back me up on this. In reading Ken Kratz' book, he directly states that he listened to the calls. That's the calls, the jail calls, and he also had someone also listening into the calls that used to write a report for him. Christy, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was backing you up with the he absolutely listened to him because he directly quotes Stephen when he ends his book.
Yep, yep. And
The
so,
whole well, if nothing else.
yeah, so there's no question that all the jail calls were listened to and analyzed. And it's pretty clear that Ken Kratz and the state were building up a profile against Stephen Millbilly. Do you have a
Well, isn't it convenient how all these threats they were getting and stuff, they document all.
Yeah.
But when it comes to other things
There's no
and
documentation,
other
correct?
cases, not just the Avery case, there's other cases in Manitowoc that go back to the 20s and current day. It's just
Yeah, I do. I do
too
agree.
many coincidences for it to not be a coincidence no more.
Yeah, I agree.
And you got
K9,
the
yeah.
same
Oh, sorry,
group
Milby.
of people, involved in all this corruption and cover. Yeah.
Yep, I agree. K9, do you have a comment?
Well, isn't it a little bit strange that when you're reading the Castle report, Barb says she goes, or when they come back from Green Bay, seeing Scott's mother, that, she stops off and picks something up. She goes over to Scott Tadych's, and they're going to watch.
Yes.
But Steven says in the phone call, you were washing dishes and that you left at 9:06.
Yes.
Well, at 8 o'clock, Prison Break comes on. So at 9:06, there's no Prison Break. What's the deal there? Another lie.
Well, Christy or Millbilly, do you want to make a comment about that? Because doesn't Steve Avery make a comment to Jody regarding seeing his sister go off?
He talks about after Barb was chopped off, he went over by her and she made a comment to him, to Brendan. I see the dishes are done because Brendan was supposed to wash them, but he
Yes.
didn't. He didn't and couldn't because he was over with Steven helping him. And then he was laughing about
Yeah.
it. And he starts talking to her. The call starts at like 8:58.
Yes.
He's
Correct.
talking about how Barb's never there. She's always gone. She's out the door. And then at 9:06 p.m., you hear him say, "Oh, there she goes."
Yeah.
Now, they could have still been watching Prison Break because back then they did have DVRs. He could have pre-recorded it, so that could have been factual. Doesn't mean they watched it live.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Millbilly. Chrissy, do you have a comment?
No, he covered it all. He got the whole call.
Okay. Excellent.
Times
Thank you
and
so
all.
much.
He knows the precise times. I do not.
Yes. Yes. All right then. So we can talk about Scott Tadych and Bobby Dassey for hours, but I think what we'll do, we'll leave it there because we've covered a lot of these aspects before in previous podcasts. And now what I like to do is to switch track completely and have a look at slide 175. Now, as one chapter comes to a close, another chapter opens up. And for me, this is where the real tragedy takes place, and that's the Brendan Dassey case. And as you can see here on slide 175, the first day of Brendan's trial is April the 16th, 2007. And we can actually see a picture. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that Andy Colburn that's got his hands on Brendan Dassey? Is that Colburn? The one
Yeah.
without the glasses?
Mm-hmm.
It's Colburn.
And if you look in most of the audio or video or photo,
yes,
it's usually the same few officers that were involved in this case that are transporting him.
Correct.
Like Greg Shedder, Andrew Colborn, Bill
Correct.
Tyson, and all of them.
Yes. Yes. They really kept a close check on Brendan Dassey for some unknown reason. But it's interesting how it's Colburn who's intimately involved in both both Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey. It's the same, as you said, it was the same players.
Now, if you're going to testify in a court case, wouldn't you be barred from watching the proceedings until you testify?
Yeah.
Then why are the officers that are involved in this case, that are suspected of tampering with evidence or planting things, allowed to be there the whole time?
Correct. Look, it still bewilders the mind how officers from the Manitowoc County were really not meant to be there, yet we continuously see that they have a major role in everything. Millbilly.
I don't understand, like, why all these discrepancies that happened, why didn't his attorneys try to address more of them?
Yeah. I don't know.
Like, what did they spend this $240,000 on for him?
I don't know. I'm starting to now think that both
Or correction, how much of the $240,000 that they paid him did they use for his defense? How much did they?
Yeah, that's a very good point. BB, do you have?
I don't even know where to begin. I always say the beautiful pigs play. And they also did some breakdown at one point and dared to say that they were making like $7 an hour worth for him because of all the hours they put in.
Well, Jerry Beauty said himself, the 6 months leading up to the trial, they really.
Well, where did I go?
Then they were on the case for what, 14 months? Well, Dean Strain released. He knew about this from day one when Stephen Avery called Stephen Glenn's office and talked to him.
Yes. Sam, thank you, Millbilly. Sammy, do you have?
Well, it was just a personal comment, and I just couldn't be more disappointed in them as lawyers. I'm a woman, and I have a big argument with the fact that they did this gentleman's agreement, the fact that they did not drive and make the prosecution prove that Teresa Hallback was the murdered person, or that there was no crime scene, there was no proof of death other than those bones that could have came from anywhere, and nobody insisted on it being tested.
Forensically, there was no crime. There's just a story.
Yeah, the whole thing could have easily been made up, and I do agree with BB regarding the bones. The bones came in a box and left in a box. There's no proper crime scene documentation. There are no in situ photographs. And one thing that rings true, and it's said many, many times, and until you think about it, you don't understand the significance. The burn pit itself was small. The fire pit that Stephen Avery had was relatively small. And yet we are to believe that a human being got burnt in that relatively small confines, and the fact that the state had used heavy machinery in order to dig out the dirt. Now, if you burn a human body, a corpse, the corpse is going to be burnt in situ. It's going to be on the top. The human corpse isn't going to move to other locations. And this is why I'm having so many issues with the way Ken Kratz handled the evidence. He was just making it up on the go. Obi-Wan, do you have a comment?
Well, because we're talking about the bones here for a second. Like you said, if the body was there or bones, like they were running those heavy machinery over that ground there.
Yes.
You don't know. I don't even know how many times. I know that they made like several mounds of dirt and they were in and out of there with those machines, you would expect or think like there's machines having tracks or you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
It has that huge ass metal bucket on there or whatnot, but
Yes.
it would do so much damage to bone, bone that was burnt or charred.
Yes.
Heated up to a certain temperature, it would have literally just broke that to next to.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
you would have seen track marks on those bones, damage or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we all know, right? The number one thing you do when you're looking at a crime scene like that involves someone that has been burnt or cremated is that you come in with a gentle approach. You use brushes, you use a grid. The last thing you do is you bring in heavy machinery. You bring in heavy machinery because there's nothing there, right? If there's an obvious crime scene there, you rope it off, you bring in the coroner, and you process it properly. But guys, again, we've talked about this in previous podcasts. Yes, it is very frustrating. But what I like to do now is to, if we can, focus our attention on Brendan Dassey. Bibi, do you have a comment?
Just a quick one. Even if the police set up some kind of a makeshift grid with like 4 or 6 cubicles and dug them out, it would have been better than and documented which bones were in which pieces of which grid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if it wasn't a proper one like the coroner, it would have.
Correct. It would have been. Yes, it would have been some type of attempt, right? And we've actually seen. Yes, we've actually seen the footage. We've actually seen the photographs of what happened at Cuss Road, right? So clearly, they know how to process a crime scene.
Yes.
Right? Yes.
Them photos are a day late.
Right.
They were there. They were there a day late investigating.
Right. Right. But they did put the blue tarp there, a huge blue tarp. They had lights. So the whole crime scene was processed presumably correctly. And of course, they had all the resources down there as well. The crime lab, all the detectives. This was no tree stump. This was a major crime scene that was processed.
That's why when you hear Colborne say Teresa Hallbach west of Avery, and then you take in the fact that we hear a dispatch call, someone saying they overheard they found a body.
Yes.
Them requesting the ambulance, Bushman going MIA.
Yep. Now they got Bushman out of retirement. Is that correct, Billy?
Well, he retired in 2005, and then he became a reserve deputy.
Right.
Just like Todd Herman. They're both called in on the same day. They both arrived together. Bushman's there for about 9.5 hours. He never comes back, but Todd Herman's there.
Right.
It's just the same group of individuals are involved in so much shady activity.
Well, that's
undocumented reports, lying to people.
Yes. Well, that's why I was extremely interested in yesterday's podcast regarding Ricky, because what you hear are the same names coming up all the time. And you can see a pattern you can see a clear pattern that's emerging.
When Ricky is killed, Bushman is the dispatch commander.
Yes.
He's then promoted to lieutenant. And then he's assigned to the Hostletter case.
Right. Okay. So it's a bit like Dracula looking after the blood bank, right? See, this is the major issue that I keep on. Yes.
See, in 2004, he's been promoted again because he's the follow-up officer for the 04 fire. Barb.
Right. Yes.
He's the one that determines on what's going to happen with the case. Is it going to continue to stay open? Is it going to be closed? What's going to go happen?
Right.
And
that's the car fire near the Avery property.
Yes.
Right. Do you know whether that's still open?
It is as of the 2016 activity report I have access to. It's still an open case.
It's a still open case because didn't we try and question Jody about the fight?
Yeah, he brings it up twice.
Yes.
And refers to the blazer as being Steven's blazer, and that's not true.
Yes.
And then in that interview, he goes on to like asking him about the cat situation, the Sandra Moore's situation.
Correct.
No, Steven yet.
No,
I don't even think she was born yet.
That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. And look, I mean, thank God for those phone calls because we can see what the intentions were of the investigators right off the.
They used them jail calls to make their case.
Correct. And as you can see, when Jody was questioned, she didn't play ball. So unfortunately, the person who got trapped in the bear trap was Brendan Dassey.
And another big thing about that, when they're talking to Jody, they tell her, "We know he did this alone."
Yes.
So when Jody refuses to cooperate any further, and she's about to get released, what do? Let's go back and start listening to these calls again, and then they find Brendan.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. And so we have here, obviously, Brendan has been arrested, and we all know about the infamous telecast that, or the transmission that Ken Kratz did on March the 2nd, and how potentially devastating that was. Millbilly, do you have a comment?
Well, you look what they tried to do to Jody to get her to flip.
Oh, boy.
If they went to that extreme, imagine what they did to Brendan Dassey in the interview that we have no record.
Yeah. Yes, correct. Kelly, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like they really wanted Jody to flip, and I guess that was more so they could get her to try to influence Stephen to talk to get some answers and get there. But at the end of the day, you got to wonder why they wanted her to flip, because she was in jail. It's not like she could not alibi him, but alibi him to.
First they went after
one
Marie.
that killed him, because how the hell would she know?
They went after Marie first, and she didn't cooperate. So then they went to Jody. Jody didn't cooperate. They went to Brendan.
Yeah.
I think the presence of somebody.
You can even hear in that phone call where Kayla's in the background talking about the investigators, girl, telling her, "You have to remember. You got to remember. You got to remember this.
Yeah.
You can't remember something that never."
Correct.
So what they were trying to do was trying to get Jody to say. It was that they were just obviously trying to get Jody to say something on the line, like
Jody.
Yeah, he would do something like that. It was him. It would have been.
Yes.
Anybody they talked to, they tried to get them to say something negative about Stephen Avery.
Correct.
Just like when they go to talk to Tammy Weaver after he mentions that she told him that the car was planted and the cops did this.
Yes.
They start out talking about that so-called incident that happened, spend about maybe, we don't know exactly what's talked about because we got the officer reports and they manipulate the things that they want to take. But right after they talk to her about that, then they go and start asking her to say something negative about something that would paint him in a bad light.
Correct. Oh, no question
Thing
about
they
it.
could use.
Correct.
That's what they did to everybody.
To slowly build their monster.
Yes, but that's true. They are slowly building their monster. But Christy, you back me up. The problem is Stephen Avery couldn't keep his mouth shut.
Absolutely. And they took things he said out of context. They used everything he said in those phone calls, but everything that they used was taken out of context. every single bit of it, and they did it on purpose.
Oh, correct. Obi-Wan, do you have a comment? Thank you, Christy.
Well, I was just kind of getting back on track with the photo.
Yes.
In the slide. With Manitowoc transporting Brendan, I don't understand how that's even legal for them to even do that, because he's obviously in a different borough or a different county. I don't see how Manitowoc was even allowed to. It was like they were like guarding him, or they were.
Oh yeah.
No, the Calumet Sheriff's Department transported him to Manitowoc, and then Manitowoc took over the custody of him.
Yeah, I don't get that.
It's in their. I don't get it either. It's just retarded.
And why wasn't he in a juvenile facility instead of the county jail?
Why were they holding Stephen in the women's jail?
Yeah. Crazy. Absolutely crazy.
Why were they holding him? And why did they put another prisoner with him in the women's jail?
Oh, we know that.
I mean,
Christy knows the answer to that, right?
Visiting hours is.
That's because Stephen on Stephen's call with Jody. Jody's they're obviously fighting, and Jody says, "Well, you only act like this when you're trying to show off in front of somebody to create the chaos."
Yes,
how often was it? Like the very next day, or within 2 days, he has a cellmate show up when they realize he's talking to Jody a lot.
Yeah.
To maximize the chaos in his life, they do that.
Correct. Yep, there's no question about that. But yeah, Sammy, did you have a quick comment?
No, Luna Moon in here was asking Millbilly if he thought, that law enforcement killed or burned Teresa.
Oh, good question.
No, I don't know. I don't know what happened to Teresa, and I stopped theorizing what I've been focused on how we already know why they framed him. We just got to figure out who all participated and how it all took place.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank
you, Millbilly. I mean, guys, if you look at the forensic evidence, if you're using the strict rules, Cohen could not have stated that the victim's bones or the muscle tissue that she tested belonged exclusively to Teresa Hallbach. It was suggestive, but not definitive. Yes, it was from a female, but only 7 out of 15 loci came up. And the rules are that at that stage, you needed 15 loci. You needed a 15 out of 15 loci match. And that was not shown. Even the mitochondrial DNA was suggestive. You couldn't exclude Teresa Hallbach, but collectively, you could not state that the cremains belong to Teresa Hallbach. Bibi, do you have a comment?
Yeah, but I lost it.
Okay.
I just
Millbilly.
I don't see how the dogs are on an intense track. They're using Teresa's shoes for this scent.
Yes.
7 days after she disappeared.
Yes.
And why is it so strong?
Well, I mean, for me personally, having a look at the forensic data that we've got, I'm convinced that the cremains do belong to Teresa Hallbach. She was definitely around that property somewhere, and the dogs were following her scent. Millbilly, do you have a comment?
I'm something happened there. So I believe they found everything on the 7th and came back on the 8th and planted it.
Oh yeah. I'm fairly convinced of that as well. BB, do you have a comment?
Yes, I remembered what it was. Okay, you said 15 loci was what it used to be. So now it's over 20, isn't it?
It's 20. Yeah, the FBI now demands 20.
So basically, they had 7 out of 20.
Yes, by today's standard. Correct. Which is no.
Could have been me and you.
Potentially, except they did find a double X.
Now, had they,
so the remains were female, millbilly.
Well, okay, so not me and you, but
had they got a full profile on A23?
No, they haven't.
No, I said if they had.
Oh, yes.
What would that have been? What could they have done with it then?
Well,
as it being a partial.
Well, if it was a full profile, a full genomic profile, it could have run A23 against. Now, we don't know whether A23 was male or female. Sheree Cohen never made that clear. But if you have a full genomic profile of A23, you can determine whether it's a male or female, run it through CODIS, and see if it matched anyone that's in the criminal database. Furthermore, you can take a DNA sample from everyone who went near that RAV4, even just to eliminate them. So you would want to get DNA from Scott, Tadych, Scott Blowdorn, Ryan Hilligus, and the police, Colburn, Lenk, Fassbender, anyone that went near that RAV4, you want to even just to eliminate them. But here's the issue. No one said that they were bleeding next to the RAV4. So it's rather remarkable that you've got a blood sample on the back door latch of the Toyota RAV4 that the state is saying that's where the victim was placed in. So a partial profile is good, but it means that you can, what Sheree Cohen was able to do was eliminate Stephen and Brendan, right? Because even though it was a partial profile, they're able to exclude them.
Yeah, because you can take the partial profile and compare it to the profile.
Correct.
If there was any kind of linkage.
Correct. So the alleles were different.
So the only way you'd be able to find out who belongs to that partial profile is to test it to other people's full profiles.
No question.
Wasn't there enough blood there that she could have just taken more again and got a full one?
Yeah.
There was a big splash of blood in the
there was blood.
world of blood. Right.
Yeah, there was blood. And
so there's kind of like no excuse why she couldn't have worked up a full profile on that.
Correct. I think it was Stolke or Groffy, one of the two, spotted the blood and said, you better take a swab of this. And she did a presumptive test for blood and it came positive. That means that there was sufficient blood there for her to do a DNA extraction and a PCR. Clearly, she only obtained a partial profile on A23, which meant that what she should have done was go back and re-extract DNA.
And then put it in CODIS.
Correct. Run it through CODIS. Sammy, do you have a question?
Yeah. Janet asked, was the broken light tested for fingerprints or DNA?
No.
There's very little information about that light. And one thing for sure, they haven't given it to Zelna to test, because that's exactly what she wants to do. Forensically test it, fingerprints, DNA. They won't give her the light.
Okay. Bean is asking, was Teresa excluded from A3?
We don't know. We do not know.
They said A23. Sorry.
Just A23. We do not know.
If you think about it, we see photos of the RAV with all the evidence that was collected from it sitting in the real tailgate. So if the RAV is sealed, the stuff inside of it will be sealed too.
Correct.
Convenient.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And just to answer Sammy's question, if A23 matched, some of the loci matched Teresa, they still, like, if there was any loci that were different, they would have stated. If the loci were a match to Teresa, or the loci that came up were a match, they would have gone back and re-extracted it to say, oh, that's Teresa's blood on the back door handle, but they never did. So there's got to be a reason why the state avoided re-extracting A23. There had to be. To me, I personally believe that A23 belongs to a male. That's why Colhane said, oh yeah, we've excluded Stephen, right? So obviously the alleles that came up were different to Stephen. Same with Brendan, otherwise she would have mentioned it. So we don't know who A23 belongs to. Same with CX. That's the blood that was found at the quarry. We do not know.
And it's because it didn't fit with their narrative.
Correct. Correct. So again, it's not what you include, but it's what you exclude. And clearly they didn't pursue CX and A23 because it could have pointed to somebody else. Their focus was on Stephen and on Brendan Dassey. And you can see that, the way they approach the case. So guys, Sammy, you have no problems at all. So guys, if we have a look at slide 175, you can see that Brendan's appointed lawyer was Mark Fremgen, and he did an okay type of job. I mean, he was basically thrown into the mix and had to pick up the pieces. Millbilly.
He looks like a younger Ken Kratz.
Yeah. Yes, but of a completely different personality. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the initial person that represented Brendan happened to be a distant cousin to Teresa Horbach. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So
that's why they had to get Len me out.
That's Kaczynski. Right, Len Kaczynski. So basically, he had to excuse himself, and Len Kaczynski and Michael O'Kelly later were appointed to look after Brendan. Bibi, do you have a comment?
I think he would have been better with Teresa's relative.
I reckon you're probably right. Correct. But Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I have a question. Do we know whose choice it was to try Stephen and Brendan separately? Is that something that the state said we want to do this, and then both defendants didn't object, or was that something that Dean and Jerry said no, we don't want the same trial? Do we know the path that decision?
No, I don't. I tried looking for it, but I couldn't find the decisions that went behind closed doors of why they would treat the cases separately. Panel, does anyone have any idea? Christy?
I don't as of now, but I'm sure if we keep listening to phone calls.
Yeah.
That's probably where we'll get information like that.
Yeah.
I believe it's great the state, but I think it's more of an assumption on my part that it's the state and they had to sever them so they could make it fit for both narratives of killed in the trailer, killed in the garage.
Well, yes. As to the phone calls, it's very apparent that Stephen Avery knows we're listening.
Yeah.
It's awfully convenient for Kratz that he got to tell two completely different narratives in two different trials.
Correct.
To have them separately at the end of Stephen's trial, there's only one person that the evidence possibly point. And had he had to try them both and synchronize the stories that he told, to me, even that would have been a thing. It's obvious from the phone calls that Stephen is not happy about Brendan, and that there's some personal animosity there. But So I was just wondering perhaps if it was Stevens, law team that sort of set that apart. I don't know.
Yes, I do not know what the history is of separating the two cases, but I think it became pretty apparent with Fassbender and Wiegert interrogating Brendan that Brendan was a very, very poor witness. And like you said, Big Jeff, people make contradictory statements when they're not there, when they're not present at the crime scene, they invent stuff. So one can imagine that if Brendan Dassey was to confess at his uncle's trial, you could imagine if Brendan Dassey got up on the stand and basically recanted everything he said. Billy, do you have a comment?
Look at his interrogation. First, they get him to tell him this gruesome story. They leave the room, then they come back, and then they get him to say things where they can go back and find more evidence.
Correct. Do you have a comment?
Well, yeah, I'm just coming. One of the things that we don't see a lot in Man is Brendan's jury pool, and I'm just wondering, what type of rock would you have to have been living under to not know that Stephen Avery, his accomplice, was just convicted, and what impact that must have had on any prospective jury pool? Could you actually find a person that was not aware of this and that time? It boggles the mind how having the trial where they had it, they could have possibly had an unbiased jury pool. It's just it's impossible.
No, impossible. Yes. The whole state was corrupted.
Yeah, starting with the press conference.
Unless you were living underneath a rock, there's no way you would not know anything about this. Living in Wisconsin, let alone Manitowoc, Calumet.
Yeah, I agree.
It's all over the papers. It's over every single news broadcast. They're holding press conferences every single day.
Yeah, you got saturation cover.
It's just not surprising that under such circumstances, you don't need a lick of forensic evidence to convict somebody. Just that coerced confession.
Yes. It was trial by media, and then just the news reports. You hear them interviewing random people, and
correct.
The things I hear are just astounding. Like for instance, a lady says, Lori Deppis, she's a missing person. Maybe Avery has something to do with that. She went missing in 1991. He was still in prison.
Well, that's it. Once it gets out into the general population, all hell breaks loose.
Trick somebody.
Yes, correct.
Convince somebody they've been tricked.
Correct. Yes, and we mustn't forget, with Stephen Avery, there was forensic evidence, and it looked bad for Stephen, but it could be argued. With Brendan Dassey, we have the opposite. There is no forensic evidence that ties him to the murder of or sexual assault and murder of Teresa Halbach. Zero. There's no forensic evidence. So this was potentially a difficult case for the state because it was solely based on confession, right? There's no physical evidence at all. But what's interesting here, and this is on slide 175, was Ken Kratz's demeanor, how his demeanor changed when he was talking about what had happened to Teresa. And I put it down to Ken Kratz becoming the surrogate father, showing all the emotions, all the turmoil. And you can see demeanor, his demeanor changed. And he asked two specific questions about Brendan Dassey. He asked, was he there and did he help? And so remember, there's no forensic evidence that they could call up. Culhane couldn't test anything. The only results that Culhane gave were all negative. Couldn't find his DNA, hair, fiber, semen, urine, nothing. They couldn't connect him to the trailer nor the garage, and I believe not even to the RAV4. It's almost as though he was never there. Big Jeff.
Not only could they not corroborate his forensic evidence, they couldn't even corroborate the pictures that he drew and the evidence that should have been associated with those pictures. For example, the handcuffing or chaining to the bedpost, there was no marks in the bedpost. The pictures that had her thrown on the fire whole. Well, we know there was kerf marks and cut marks on her, on those bones, if they were hers or not.
Correct.
And that picture shows a whole person going on the fire, not cutting up. There was nothing in his confession about cutting her up.
Yeah.
They couldn't corroborate on many different levels.
Oh, and the fact that in Stephen's trial, they dropped all the charges of those.
Yes, they did. They did. When Brendan was arrested, Ken Kratz added, I believe, 3 more charges against Stephen. 3. Based on solely confession, Christy.
He had to do that to make sure that the property bond didn't get approved.
Right. Okay.
He had to.
And didn't the bond kept on going up and up?
He asked for $2 million, and I believe the judge put it at $750 cash.
750,000.
But he asked for $2 million. Kratz wanted $2 million.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, it just became a farce. And of course, we know the outcome. The state actually dropped all of those 3 those 3 additional charges against Stephen Millbilly.
In Stephen's case, it happened in the bedroom.
Yes.
In Brendan's, it happened in the garage.
Yes, because Brendan stated about the shooting event. And Ken Kratz, you could tell, even in his book, when he's looking at the forensic evidence, he actually moved the crime scene from the trailer to the garage. You know, when he was confronted, well, where's your forensic proof that any crime took place in the trailer? Ken Kratz just simply said, well, she wasn't murdered there. That's why you don't find any blood, hair, fiber, nothing. She was murdered in the garage. So he was simply shifting the crime scene willy-nilly to try and fit the narrative. Big Jeff.
Did you want to talk about your observation this morning from Ken Kratz's book about his theory as to why there was no blood found in the garage? What do you want to say, Brad?
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll discuss it later on. But they did with the garage, of course. Remember, we've got Kayla talking about blood seeping through the concrete. So, of course, the investigators went in there, ripped up a sizable portion of the garage. I remember they luminol treated it, and it came up positive with the luminol. But the problem is with luminol, it reacts not only with blood, but with bleach and with other chemicals as well.
And urine.
Yes. So essentially what they did was that they tore up certain sections of the garage, took out concrete bits and pieces, and forensically tested it for the presence of blood.
So basically anything that has iron in it would test positive.
Yeah, correct. And if you're working in a garage with metal and other bits and pieces, of course it's going to light up like a Christmas tree. Well, when they tested the concrete pieces forensically, they found no blood. There was no DNA of Teresa Halbach anywhere. And
but
the way...
Another thing I noticed, Brendan states that they used his mother's golf cart.
Right.
So why do they confiscate Barb's?
Yeah, good question.
Not Barb's. They don't confiscate Barb's. They go and take Dolores's.
Yes. Yep. Good question. So when Ken Kratz was questioned, okay, you tore up the garage, you tested it for blood. There's no blood of Teresa Halbach anywhere. Ken Kratz in his book goes, well, my theory is, remember, Teresa Halbach apparently was shot 10 to 11 times. The theory was Stephen Avery put her on a tarp and shot her on a tarp. So hence the blood would not leak out anywhere, but it'll be on the top.
And in his interrogation, you can see the cops mess up a bunch of times. Like after they get him convinced that she was shot and killed in the garage and everything, then they have to go back and they're like, okay, so when did he start the fire? Was the fire already going? And he can't answer these questions.
Yeah, yeah, and they also questioned Brendan's brother as well, who then later stated that he lied on the stand about seeing Stephen go up to his burn barrel and put in a plastic bag, because that was important too. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
Very important.
I was just back on the tarp.
Yes.
Where did Stephen find this bulletproof tarp? Because if he shot her 10 times and those bullets went right through her, they must have they bounced off the tarp. Is that what happened to them? And they wouldn't they put holes in the tarp if he's shooting down unless he got down and had the gun parallel to the garage floor to shoot. Yeah,
correct.
And it wouldn't blood leak through the hole in the tarp created by the bullet going through the body, bouncing up? So what kind of an idiot theory is that? Thank you, Ken.
That's true, but you see, Ken has to make things up. He has to speculate, because when there's no forensic proof, you have to come up with some type of explanation. Oh, well, there's no blood because of. But it just gets worse. It just gets worse. The fantasy becomes even bigger, right? You have a domino effect. You have a domino effect.
Holds about as much water as that hole-ridden tarp would, in my opinion.
Correct. Yeah, I agree. Of course, I didn't find any tarp at all. So there's no evidence that she was shot in the garage. Christy, do you have a comment?
I just wanted Jeff to know that the bulletproof tarps are in aisle 6 next to magic bleach.
Thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Just take this perspective. They say that she was strangled, throat cut, stabbed in the bedroom.
Yes.
They then take her out to the garage, shoot her 10 times. They then, at some point, load her into the back of the RAV, then take her out, and then put her on that little wrecker, carry her over to the fire pit.
Yes.
Why wouldn't you just put her in the back of the RAV and drive the car over to the fire pit?
You mean 10 feet? You mean 10 feet?
I mean, it's behind the garage.
That's correct.
He's really tired from carrying her down the hallway, out the door, all the way over to the garage to shoot her, then pick her up and put her in the car. He's getting really tired. He's not. So
you gotta remember, Brendan Dassey, when he admits to her being shot finally, when they say who shot her in the head, he says it happens outside the garage.
Yeah.
And the first thing he says when they ask him, so what did you do with the car? Put the gun in it?
Yeah.
No, we're not worried about that. We don't know what he did with the car.
Yes.
What did he do under the hood? Did he go under the hood? Did he touch anything?
Yeah. Yes.
They're leading him the whole time.
That's correct.
They should be asking him yes or no questions, just like they were doing with Earl. But the questions that they're asking Earl, he couldn't have answered them yes or no, because they're asking questions he doesn't know the answers to.
No, that's correct. Thank you, Millbilly. Sammy, do you have a comment?
Yes, Neverly says, didn't Robert Fabian testify that he smelled burning, melting plastic, as in Teresa Hallback's phone, yet no one smelled the human flesh burning right there next to the barrel? Yeah. And Dark Side of the Moon says coal burn at Maribel Caves, too. That's strange. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it is very much so. But you can see how certain witnesses were coerced into saying things that didn't take place, because the state's trying to build up this incredible case against Stephen that, a human body was burned just outside his garage in the burn. Absolutely no one smelled burning flesh. K9, do you have a comment?
No, you just said it. If a body was burned outside in the pit, everybody would have smelled it. Furthermore, a burning body is going to slough off, and only the bones be left. And what sloughs off is going to seep into the ground, and it's going to stay there for a long, long time. But you see them over there digging stuff up, standing around, looking at it. No.
Well, if you look.
Thank you, K9. Millbilly.
Wasn't there a bloody sock in the gravel pit as well?
Then they come back and they completely destroy that area.
Yes, I did. They did. Sammy, what was your question? Was there a bloody sock in
Yep,
the burn
Myard
pit?
asked, wasn't there a bloody sock in the gravel pit as well? Was that ever tested?
Yeah, they also found shotgun shells too, and a necklace in the pond, in between. It's right west of Avery's from through the. They found it around. They found the shotgun shells by the conveyor.
Yes, I did. Now, I'm not sure whether they tested the bloody sock. I don't recall any information about that at all.
But wasn't there a shotgun found in Earl's jet or Neon? One of them vehicles, they found a shotgun and a shotgun.
I think you're correct.
Now, do those shotgun shells match the same shotgun shells that were found in the quarry? We don't know.
I don't know. I know that they gave GPS coordinates for the shotgun shells that were in the quarry, that they were sort of everywhere. But I don't know whether any follow-up has been done.
There's also notes of items that were looked at but weren't taken into custody.
Right.
But they also marked the GPS locations of every said item.
Yes.
My question is, what are they finding across from 147 in that person's front yard? If you can hear it in the dispatch calls from Manitowoc, the transmissions, they asked for some lady to be paged. Colborne does immediately. They had mentioned the GPS location of where they are.
Yes.
Nancy Colley.
Yes. I mean, Millbilly, these are all excellent questions. I don't know if anyone's got the answers to them.
The answers are there. They're just withholding evidence.
Yes.
And reports.
Well,
okay.
Sam.
I want to interrupt. Ronald mentioned something earlier about Deppie. Laura Deppie's was never officially found. Since bones in the gravel pit couldn't be ID'd, they could have been hers.
I've always thought that too. And just recently, I believe, or before, they actually classified her as deceased.
Right. But don't forget, good question, Sammy. Don't forget, though, that the bones that were found in the Manitowoc County gravel pit burnt to the same degree as apparently the bones that were in Yonder burn barrel number 2 and the burn pit. And furthermore, the bones that were found in the Manitowoc County gravel pit had cut marks on them. Right? So it's consistent. And according to Dr. Eisenberg, we're looking at the bones of one victim.
Yeah, but there's no documentation on where these bones came from, discovery, how they looked when they were found.
Yes.
So who's to say that they're telling the truth? That we don't know. There wasn't a proper investigation done.
No, I agree.
So
I agree.
There needs to be a new trial and then an investigation opened up from an outside agency.
Correct. And just to answer Sammy's question, that's why it was crucial not to give away the bones back to the Hallbach family, because you need to know the identity of whose cremains they belong to. Are we talking about one victim, 2, or more? We don't know. And giving back the bones means that you now no longer have that chance to determine whose cremains they belong to.
I would like to say one thing, that those bones would have been their undoing. They had to get rid of them.
Oh, no question. No question. You can see the way they've treated Kathleen Zellner, the lack of respect, also the obfuscation. They've put up a wall. They're not going to give her anything. They don't want to give her the bones. They don't want to give her the RAV. They don't want to give her the light from the RAV4. And it's very interesting that you've got all these inconsistencies that are going on. Millbilly, do you have a comment?
Well, if all this evidence is still sealed, that means she doesn't have access to. That means she hasn't had access to Bobby Dassey's interview. Because everything that's been requested has been denied because it's sealed evidence and cannot be touched unless there's a new trial.
Yes, correct. So there's a loophole. It's a catch-22. You want to do an investigation, you want to have a look at the evidence, but they're not going to give it to you. And I think the state is systematically destroying or removing as much evidence as possible because they know they're going to get caught.
Well, I mean, is the evidence that we are beginning to give access to being given access to us because the state has opened and looked at it?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, look
Now,
at the...
now you think about this too. Who did they have in there to testify? Eisenberg, right? Neverly says Eisenberg's cases should be investigated for integrity. We know of 2 cases where she messed up. And TH and Rudy, who's to say there were not more cases where she customized her report?
Correct. Well, the damage of Eisenberg was her inability to call the bones at the Manitowoc County gravel pit as human. So she held back. Ken Kratz would have coached Eisenberg and said, if you're not 100% sure, do not be definitive in giving your answer. Because if they were human bones, then Ken Kratz would have had to add another layer to his fantasy story about the bones. In other words, and he even says in his book, he says, well, if they turned out to be Teresa's cremains, then Stephen Avery just simply wanted to scatter the cremains over a large area so the focus would not be put on him, right? So that's the way he operated. He had to find an excuse that somehow fitted his narrative. Millbilly.
And Kratz also tries to give the impression that the bones that were found in the quarry were found adjacent to Stephen Avery's property.
Yes.
But there's no, even in his book, in his new chapters, he states that bones were found near Cuss Road. Where is this documented, for one?
Yes.
Because all the documents I've seen about bones that Zellner, even her brief, is nowhere near Stephen Avery's property.
Yes.
Why are all the dogs going away from Stephen Avery's property?
Correct. Sammy, thank you, Millbilly. Sammy, do you have a comment?
No, I was just telling Millbilly it's not. And then, you look at anything that points away from Stephen Avery, they put the kibosh on it just as quick as they can.
Correct.
Well, just like in Earl's interview, Earl starts to say, well, the cops are setting them up. And we don't want to hear none of that.
Yeah.
They had the good cop, bad cop technique in there.
Yes.
Well, and he kept bringing up, oh, we're not Manitowoc. We're not Manitowoc. We're not Manitowoc. We're not Manitowoc.
Yeah.
I don't even know you. I'm from the Department of Criminal Investigation. We're not. We're here to help.
Well,
that's a big fat joke.
Yeah. Well, that's the line. That's the line that we get used on Stephen. He says, oh, I don't know who you are. I'm from Calumet. I don't know who you are. So, he gave him this false sense of security that he was impartial.
Even when they're placing him in the cuffs, he says, I have nothing against you guys. Manitowoc's planting everything. You guys are finding it.
Yes. Correct. Well, guys, I am conscious of the time. Obi-Wan, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I think it's. I think you're right. What you said about them systematically, like destroying all the evidence, even like new things that are being found. Like whenever like anybody comes out with like semi-new information or something that we haven't thought about before, it's like they'll take that information, they'll go and seek out the whatever information or evidence pertaining to it, and they'll do something with it. Like that light, you know for a fact, whenever Zellner gets it, if she gets it, it's going to be wiped clean of any evidence.
Correct. Yeah, it's going to dilute the importance of that piece of forensic evidence because they're removing as much of it as possible. And just to prove a point here, guys, thank you, Obi-Wan. Look how damaging item FL was for the state, right? Now, if you read Ken Kratz's book, Ken Kratz states that item FL was the game changer because it puts Teresa Hallbach in Stephen Avery's garage, and the rifle that was in Stephen Avery's bedroom fired item FL, and item FL had Teresa Hallbach's DNA on it. So that's the state's case against Stephen Avery as being the murderer, right? But we know that item FL has got a lot of problems with it. And I did a podcast with Big Jeff talking about Cherie Culhane and item FL. And I also did a presentation documenting all the issues with item FL. So what the state was trying to do was, okay, they handed item FL to Kathleen Zellner. Unbeknown to them, they had an expert that put item FL under a high-powered microscope, and they did elemental chemical analysis on the bullet. Lo and behold, there was no evidence of bone. There were no bone shards, and chemically there was no evidence of bone on item FL. However, what the analysis found was, instead of bone shards, there were wood shards and appeared to be red flecks, which was the paint of the garage wall. So it appears that item FL didn't go through bone, it actually went through the garage wall. And the investigators found it supposedly on the floor. But remember, there are photographs showing under the compressor, and Billy will back me up. There are no signs of bullets underneath the compressor.
I've also heard somebody try to argue the fact that while they were jackhammering, they dislodged the bullet from the wood.
That's possible because you got vibration, right? You got vibration that can take place. So the bullet could have either dislodged from the wall and fallen to the ground. That is possible. Also, the change in temperature, because it was very snow-laden, ice, could have easily caused distortion in the wood and caused the bullet to fall down.
Just think what would have happened if Brendan would have stuck with his story that it happened outside the garage.
Yeah.
They'd have been screwed. There was 8 inches of snow on the ground.
Correct. And Ken Kratz even made the comment that, we made sure we took video of the outside of the garage because it was 8 inches or several feet of snow to prove that nobody walked from law enforcement had walked on the ice to plant item FL. That's how ridiculous it got. So that's why they showed the outside of the garage with the snow to prove that no law enforcement officer had planted item FL. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I have two. Well, first is we know James Link was in the garage the day before MFL was found. It was
correct.
Number one, with a bunch of other people. And number two is, it's astounding that Ken Kratz would identify item FL as the case game changer. It
Yes.
clearly is. And as
Yes.
we examine sort of the foul timeline that we have here,
Yes.
the finding of FL we don't have without Brendan's confession.
That's correct.
No confession, no finding of FL.
Correct.
No, because
correct.
there's no excuse to go back and search the garage and miraculously find something. So just it's all key. Listen to Christie's theory from previous Thursday. We finished it off this coming Thursday on our Thursday podcast, and
Yes.
it's really that confession is sort of Brendan was a major player on the chessboard. Stephen's alibi and his confession really spurned the key piece of evidence, according to King Pratt.
Well,
Correct.
When he's being interviewed by one of the news reporters, and they ask him, well, how do you explain Brendan's confession? He says his first statement he gave was true.
Yes.
And that's the truth. What Brendan said before he left the car and came back in talking about the bus driver, everything he said was true.
Yes, correct. And then things progressively spiraled out of control. But you're correct. If Brendan Dassey had kept his mouth shut and never said anything, they would have never found item FL. They would have never found Teresa Hallbuck's DNA on item FL. And there's no mechanism of death, right? Now, they did find cranial bone fragments that had beveling in them. So there's evidence that the victim, whoever the victim was shot at least twice in the skull, back of the skull, left temple. So,
well, you can't determine on when the person died.
No, you can't. You can't.
Can you state for sure that's a bullet hole? Or those are bullet holes, bevelings?
Yeah, the beveling is caused by bullet hole. There's no dispute in that, because what they did was they x-rayed the cranial bone fragments, and they found lead deposits, tiny lead flakes around the beveling. That's exactly what happens when a bullet goes through bone. So there's no dispute the victim was shot at least, or someone was shot at least twice in the skull. Sammy.
Kelly is saying if they have nothing to hide, give us all the evidence to be tested. So hand it over to KZ. Stop being cronies.
Correct. But the reason why that I want to do that is obvious. Look what happened when they gave him item FL. She basically destroyed the case. So Ken Kratz, in order to counteract that, now is stating that, well, item FL never struck Teresa in the skull. It went through her body. So how can a .22 bullet go through multiple layers of skin, fat, muscle, tissue, organ, possibly strike bone, come clean throughout the other side of the body, ricochet, and land into a wall? Millbilly, is that possible with a .22?
No. There's no evidence that 22 went through her body whatsoever. Neither FK or FL.
Correct. 2 bullet fragments were found. FK, they couldn't prove which rifle FK was fired from because it was very badly mangled. But item FL definitely came from the rifle that was found in Stephen Avery's bedroom, because they can check the lands and grooves on the bullet. It's diagnostic.
One time I was squirrel hunting, and I was sitting on a hill, and there's a tree probably about 10 yards away from me. And I just shot the tree randomly, aimed, see if my scope was on. And I shot the tree. I seen the bullet hit the tree, bounce off, and land a foot from me.
Right.
Right. The bullet wasn't really that damaged.
Yes. Yes. But it didn't penetrate the wood, right?
No, it bounced off.
It bounced off.
It almost hit me.
Right. Right. And that's a .22?
Yeah, and I was sitting down, so I was like, "Whoa!"
Right. So you're probably shocked. Well, according to Ken Kratz, IMFL went straight through Teresa Horbach. That's why you don't find any bone shards in the embedded in the bullet, right? So it obviously has to have enough penetration power to go through a human body.
Yeah, and there's
Right?
no bullet fragments found in the burn pit.
No, there's not.
Nor any slag.
Correct, because the high temperatures would have melted the lead. And I believe that Teresa Horbach had a piercing as well. There was no evidence of a piercing. Now, just one quick question. If the fire was hot enough to cremate a victim to bone fragment, how come the fire wasn't hot enough to melt the gene rivets? They found rivets, right? Supposedly found rivets in the burn pit.
And they melt at a much lower temperature than what the bone does too.
Correct.
Was there not also like cotton fiber, the gene fiber threads still attached to that rivet as well?
Yes, I believe there was.
How did that survive? I mean, above and beyond the metal, how did those fibers survive?
No idea.
There's no way. There's no
idea.
way.
So here's the contradiction. You have a fire hot enough to reduce a victim to bone fragments the size of your little finger, right? Your fingernail. Yet the fire wasn't hot enough to melt rivets. That makes no sense whatsoever. Sammy, do you have a quick question?
Yes, Disco was asking where were the skull fragments found again?
Well, according to
in
the
a box.
in the box. Well, in the fire pit. In the fire pit. In the burn pit. In Stephen Avery burn
the only
pit.
photo we see from the fire pit is the bone.
Yes.
That's it. That's it.
I mean, think about it. Sorry, Obi-Wan, do you have a comment?
If that bone was found in the fire pit, then how did they find lead fragments in the bullet hole areas?
Okay.
Like
if they're documenting items that they looked at but didn't retrieve and GPS locations, why aren't they doing the same thing for the bones?
Correct. The obvious answer is the bones were never in the fire pit in the first place.
Exactly.
That's why you have no proper documentation. And it's just one thing about the burn pit, if I could just say. Ken Kratz in his book, I had to double read it to make sure I wasn't hallucinating, because of course Eisenberg said, "Yep, look, there were bones found in the burn barrel, right? In the under burn barrel number 2." So Ken Kratz in his book goes, "Oh, I can explain that." Now listen to this. So according to Ken Kratz, Stephen Avery picked up the largest 4 bones that were in the burn pit, the largest ones. We're talking about a couple of inches, right? He picked them up and he took them all the way to yonder burn barrel number 2, because he can then mix the bones with other animal bones in the burn pit and no one will know about it. He picked them up because they were too big. They were too big to burn to smaller fragments, so he took them to the burn barrel. This is the logic of Ken Kratz. So despite Stephen having a hammer, a hoe, a rake, a shovel, he decided to pick up 4 bones and bring them to the yonder burn barrel number 2. Big Jeff.
And another thing, Brendan states that after they got done burning her, he broke up the bones and smushed them and buried them in the dirt in the burn pit. Now, if that is correct and that took place, how is the cop gonna see a bone on top of the surface if it's been buried?
Yeah, obviously makes no sense. The To me, Ken Kratz and the state are clutching at straws, right? And don't forget, right, that according to Christy, if you could back me up, didn't Dolores say that they buried sheep there as well and burned sheep there as well?
Yep.
In the burn pit. So there would have been plenty of animal bones there. If you're not a forensic anthropologist and you see bits of teeth, bits of bones, you don't know what they are, whether they're animal or human. So you've got no idea what they actually found there. And let's face it, if you found cranial bone fragment in the burn pit with bullet with beveling in it, don't you think you want to photograph that in situ?
Not if you're.
No, I mean, this is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. So, as you can see, they needed Brendan. They needed Brendan because his confession, his coerced confession, led them back to the garage, led them eventually to item FL, and Teresa Horbach's DNA was found on item FL.
Dr. Silkman, can I ask you a question? Wouldn't they be teaching in Investigation 101 in situ pictures are vitally important, right? I mean, that would have been something that they should have learned right off the bat. Yeah.
No question. I mean, the important thing about when you're doing a forensic crime scene is that you always do an in situ photograph, documentation, even a video before you touch anything. Because anything that's touched, someone can say, well, you planted it there, you moved it there. What's the evidence that it was actually there? And forgot the name of the gentleman who went to the burn pit, and he was asked, well, and he wrote an email to Fassbender, why didn't you take photographs? He goes, because the scene was obviously corrupt. It had already been changed, processed. So they never took photographs. So how do you know that any of the bones were found there? Millbilly.
I don't know. I don't know. Something's got me thinking about the shotgun they found in them hunting.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, look, again, it's completely bizarre.
Obviously, the bullet fragment that went through that skull piece was not from a 22.
No, it was from and even Eisenberg stated in her report that it was from a high velocity gun. High velocity, because skull is extremely hard. Skull bone has got multiple layers and it's very, very hard to penetrate. This was a clean bullet hole, 2 of them, because you could tell from the beveling that it's a classic bullet going through the skull, into the skull, right? Now, if it was a .22 hasn't got the penetration power to go straight through the skull, right? If it entered in the skull, it would have bounced around in the brain. If that's the case, what is item FL doing on the floor? That doesn't make any sense at all. Item FL should have been found in the burn pit.
When did Eisenberg examine the skull fragment and determine that it was from a high velocity?
She said high velocity.
Was it before they talked to Brendan or after?
That's a good point.
Because obviously the cops knew that she was shot in the head.
Yes, Correct.
And I just bugs me that they tell Steven that they found bones one time. They mentioned it once. And then every time they referred to Teresa Halbach, they referred to her as a body. That the dogs took us to where the body was. The dogs took us where the plates were.
Yes. And also, don't forget, Fassbender told Stephen how the RAV4 got onto his property, right? From Cuss Road, right? And that's something that he shouldn't have told Stephen, but he did. That's just like we get telling Brendan who shot her in the head. So it's that piece of information that you want the suspect tell you, not you tell not the other way around. Isn't that correct, Big Jeff?
That's right. That's how it is.
Yeah, that's like a poker card game where you show your opposition your cards and they expect them to not notice. It's ridiculous. Okay, now guys, conscious of the time, I know that we've been going for quite a while. I would like to finish actually on slide 176. And it's clear that what they're doing is they have to construct a narrative, right? Because with Brendan, there is actually no physical evidence against him. It's all from his confession. So as you can see here, there was a very damning interview or interrogation that he did on the 1st of March. And remember, after he had done his after Fassbender and Wiegert went through the interrogation with Brendan, that's when they got a new search warrant. And the day after, that's when they went into the garage, back in the trailer. Lo and behold, Ida Meffel is found. So you can see that from the statements that Brendan made, I'll read them out. Dassey sees Teresa Halbach restrained in Stephen Avery's bedroom, handcuffed naked to bed. And the other statement was Stephen Avery's praise. Okay. That's how you do it. Now,
I just want to read something.
Millbilly.
Okay, it says a forensic pathologist to interpret gunshot pathology correctly, but because bullets fired from handguns and rifles produce gunshot wounds, a forensic pathologist should at least be familiar with the nomenclature of operation of commonly used guns and ammunition.
Yep.
So if they're not familiar with guns,
yes,
they really have no say on what they say.
Yes.
Like you just say that, yes, a bullet hit this skull and it caused this, but they can't determine exactly which bullet fragment it came from, which kind of rifle. No.
Correct. So going back with what you said, here's the issue. The rifle that was in Stephen Avery's bedroom fired Ida Meffel. No dispute, because they forensically examined the bullet and it had the same lands and grooves as a test bullet fired from that rifle. They matched. It was a perfect match. There's no dispute. But what the state didn't do is prove that Ida Meffel's skull, because the skull fragments had lead flakes. They didn't test the lead in Ida Meffel to match it to the lead that was in the cranial bone fragment. Therefore, they've got no proof that Ida Meffel ever struck bone or struck Teresa Halbach.
Well, it also says that forensic pathologists commonly describe bullets as small as 22 and 25, medium as 32 or 38 or 9 millimeters.
Yep. Yes. That Eisenberg wasn't able to say which weapon was used that produced the cranial bone fragments, the beveling in the cranial bone fragment. you would have to do, well, put it this way. Surely in all the literature, they would know based on the size of the beveling and the hole, what bullet caused that? And the question is, can a .22 cause a hole like that in a skull? Right? They could have done the testing. They could have easily ruled it in or out, but they chose not to do it.
Yeah.
Right. So in a forensic case, what they do is they get like a skull, say of an animal, and they test fire. They test fire various bullets. They can see the size of the hole that's produced. They could tell which caliber and bullet type that had caused that damage. They didn't do it. They assumed that item FL was the one that produced the hole in the skull. But clearly, because there were no bone shards, item FL didn't hit Teresa in the skull. You can't prove item FL hit anyone, anywhere. That's the problem. So, guys, where do we go from here? So, just to finish this up regarding Brendan Dassey, because there's a lot more that's coming up, which we can do in another podcast. Again, Ken Kratz presented this in goes, was he there? Absolutely. Did he help? Absolutely. So remember, the only thing that they could work on was his confession. Guys, do we have any quick final comments on today's podcast? BB. Any quick final comment?
I just want to say that everybody can join us over on Discord afterwards. And I also want to put out there that we have, it does not belong to foul play. It belongs to anybody. We created a FOIA server for people to start keeping track of FOIAs that are in process, denied, approved. Just trying to make sure people don't overlap, waste their money. These things aren't free. Why FOIA something if somebody else is already in the process? And I believe there is also somebody else working on trying to look into all the ones that are getting denied and seeing.
Yeah, they really need the denial letters, right?
Yes,
really need the denial letters right now.
Yes.
Yes, that would be very helpful.
And Zoe's also put up a library.
Yes, we have a library now.
Super. So BB, any final?
No, that's good. Yeah, okay. She got them all. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Everybody have a good weekend.
Thank you, BB.
I'd invite everyone to tune in to Thirsty for Thursday next week, where we'll have part 4 of our calls, which is part 2 of Christie's theory, which we talked a little bit about today regarding the need for Brendan's confession and the as related to the property bond. And, you know, as we talked about today, Brendan was a kind of a chess piece that was protecting a lot of different players. He was a major coup for the state to get him to do what he did. And it would be a good idea to perhaps re-listen to part 1, which we did the week before the Debbie Hochstetter interview. Lastly, I'd like to echo loved the comment from the listeners regarding, you know, if the state doesn't have anything to hide, and I always like to finish that, because if you don't have anything to hide, you don't continue to hide things.
Correct. And it's amazing, if I could just make a personal comment, how even though we're doing podcasts on Man One, we're now interweaving all this information from a whole variety of sources, and it's all coming together really, really well. And you can see the richness of the TTTs, the importance of the phone calls, Millbilly's analysis of the calls from law enforcement. It's all starting to gel quite nicely together. And it's a good timeline because it hopefully will be approaching, Kathleen Zellner being able to present her case to the court, to a judge. So it's all coming really nicely together. And of course, we've just now started on Brendan Dassey, and we'll continue that in next week's podcast. K9. Millbilly.
I just want to add a thing. I just posted a link in the chat for the practical.
What was that, Millbilly? Sorry?
I just posted a link in the chat. It's to a document for the practical pathology of a gunshot wound.
Excellent.
It's pretty enlightening.
Yeah. And just on that, Millbilly, what's amazing was Kathleen Zellner's specialist, I think it was Professor Symes, what he did was he took a bone and he used various blades and saws on the bone. And he cut the bone into, you can actually see it in MAM too. So that way he was able to look at the bone fragments from the Stephen Avery trial and determine what type of blades were used to produce those cuts, right? The same thing should have been done with the bullet holes. Do studies, work out what type of bullets from what type of weapons could produce those types of holes in a skull. Because if we think about it very carefully, the victim appears to have been shot execution style. That's a typical drug hit, execution style hit, back of the head to the temple. I mean, why would you want to shoot someone twice to be sure that you've killed them? It honestly makes no sense. Bibi, do you have a quick comment?
Oh, no, sorry, I don't. I just thought
Okay. K9, thank you very much for being a guest researcher. Do you have any final comment that you would like to make?
Well, thank you for inviting me. I really did enjoy it. I think we need to dig deeper. The answer is there. I think that we're going in a circle because of all the baloney that they've thrown in here and thrown in there. And that makes it even more difficult. But thank you for inviting me. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
It's been a pleasure, K9 Kim. Thank you so much. You're correct. There's a lot of red herrings in this case. And as a consequence, you can go down a rabbit hole and spend several months going deep in that rabbit hole only to find nothing. And so that's why a team approach is really the way to go, and constant discussions, finding the type of areas that yield fruit. And that's why both Christy and I are rereading Kratz's book. I'm getting quotes from his book, and I'm going to use his words against him in a podcast that Christy and I think,
we're going on with Linda Kay.
Yes, Linda.
We'll be going on Linda Kay's channel, and we'll be
the two of you are going on Linda Kay's. Yes.
Yes, Linda Kay. Yeah, so that'll be very, very interesting. Kelly, do you have any final comments about the podcast?
I just want to thank everyone for joining us, and head over to Discord and continue the chat over there.
Fabulous. Christy, any final comments?
Just what Kelly said. Come on over to Discord and come have a chat with us. We have some pretty good case discussions, and the team approach helps because you're right. You end up going down rabbit holes. And, you may come across one of us that's already gone down a rabbit hole, or let's go down it together, or whatever, what have you. We have a great team put together, and we're all very, very helpful and all eager to help new members learn about the case. And that's just what we're all here for, to help Stephen and Brendan as much as we can.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christy. Millbilly, any final comment?
I advise people to listen to all this audio. I'm going back over again the dispatch calls, transmissions, and more things are popping out even more at me now.
Yes.
Yeah, we should all try and watch Millbilly, Linda listening, public party.
Yes.
everybody, we're all trying to work really hard together
Yes.
and work on this and achieve something.
Correct. Because no one particular group can cover everything. This case is voluminous, huge. There's so many different areas to cover. And as K9 Kim said, there are a lot of rabbit holes in this case. So it's important that we share information. That's very, very
collaborative, yes.
A collaborative approach, for sure, for sure. Obi-Wan, do you have any final?
Yeah, we're all in this together. We're all supporters and friends, although we do have our differences of opinions and views and stuff. But I mean, we're all fighting for the same thing. We're not an enemy. We're, you know,
correct.
We're all friends here. So,
yep, correct. I mean, look at our own foul play team. You've got individuals who believe Teresa Halbach is alive. That's cool. You've got individuals that believe that Teresa Halbach is stone cold dead. And that's fine too. And we present our ideas. We know that we're presenting theories. We are speculating, but we try and bring in as many official documents as we can to back up our statements, right? And when you consider that it actually is the state that's withholding information, preventing us to get to the truth, it's not our fault that we do speculate on the fate of Teresa Halbach, right? And so we present the ideas. Let's get some feedback and we can sort that out. Zoe, thank you, Obi-Wan. Zoe, do you have any final?
No.
But that was you singing on the Ricky Hochsletter podcast. Is that correct?
No, it was Jeff.
It was Jeff.
It was Jeff and Billy.
And Billy, that's right.
Well, if you haven't heard the podcast, please go check it out. It really is very heartfelt, and it's amazing that that Ricky's mother came on and said the things that she did. It really was very heartwarming and very, very touching. Yeah, and of course, she needs to know answers, even out of respect for Ricky, you know. Okay, Sammy, do you have any final?
Well, I just hope that the answers that Debbie needs finds their way to her. She's a brave woman to go over this and over this and over this, to just try to find one simple answer. That's all she's asking for.
Yes.
And we all, you know, we don't have to be fighting for this cause. We can all work together for this cause. There's men in prison for things they did not do, and something so horrendous. So, you know, we can all do this. We can do this, like all of us together.
Correct.
You know, but I want to thank everybody for coming and being here with us and for all their support. Thank you, Dr. Silkman.
Fantastic. A pleasure. Thank you very much, guys. And we will all catch you hopefully in our Discord channel, more discussions. And hopefully we will catch you all next week. And again, if you like what we do, hit the subscribe button, guys. Thank you so much for your support. Catch you later.
Bye-bye.